What if I told you that behind every flawless appearance of a society lady lay someone's ruined life that no one ever knew about? In the Gilded Age, when a woman's reputation was worth more than the largest diamond, the slightest mistake could lead to social death, and to avoid this, ladies were willing to do anything. Behind the closed doors of luxurious mansions, real tragedies unfolded, where fidelity was repaid with betrayal and devotion became grounds for dismissal. Watch the video to the end to find out how innocent maids and companions paid for their masters' momentary weaknesses with their futures. What if I told you that everything you believed about female friendship and loyalty in that era was untrue? A lady's personal chambermaid was the closest person to her, much closer than her husband or sister. She knew every fold in her mistress's dress, every flaw in her skin, and most importantly, every emotion in her heart. The morning began not with a conversation with her husband, but with the quiet whisper of the maid combing her hair and tightening her corset. In those morning hours, when the mask of a socialite had not yet been put on, an illusion of intimacy arose between the women. However, this closeness was the most dangerous trap for the maid, because she became a witness to what should have remained hidden forever. The maid saw tear-stained eyes after secret meetings, noticed the disappearance of money from the box, and knew why her mistress refused to come down for dinner. She was a living diary that could not be locked away or burned in the fireplace. That is why, when clouds gathered over the mistress's reputation, the first thing to do was to get rid of the one who knew too much. The dismissal of a maid was often framed as punishment for negligence or theft, so that no one would suspect the real reason. The lady could accuse her loyal assistant of ruining her favorite dress or losing an expensive brooch. It was a cruel but necessary measure of self-defense in a world where rumors spread faster than wildfire. Expelled with a wolf ticket and without recommendations, the girl found herself on the street, not understanding why she had been treated this way. The paradox was that the more loyal the maid was, the higher the chances were that she would become the scapegoat. The ladies knew that a loyal servant would not shout about injustice from every corner, so as not to harm her beloved mistress even after being dismissed. This silence was the last gift the servant gave to the one who had ruined her life. Rich houses were full of such invisible victims, whose names were erased from memory the day after they left. If this note was found, the maid would be blamed for allegedly conspiring or showing curiosity. Shifting the blame was a well-established mechanism that allowed the aristocracy to keep their white gloves clean. There was an unspoken rule in society: if a scandal occurred in the house, the person of lower status was always to blame. Husbands who suspected their wives of misconduct often played along with this game so as not to air their dirty laundry in public. It was easier for them to agree that the maid was a bad influence on their spouse or spreading gossip than to acknowledge the real problem. This preserved the facade of the ideal family, cemented by injustice. The fate of a maid dismissed without a recommendation was unenviable and often tragic. Without a good letter from her previous employer, she could not find work in a decent household. She had no choice but to go into service with people of a lower class or engage in hard daily labor. The splendor of silk and velvet was replaced by coarse wool and the icy water of laundries. The worst thing was that the lady who sacrificed her maid often sincerely considered herself a victim of circumstances. She convinced herself that she had no other choice and that she was saving the family's honor. Her conscience was drowned out by new dresses, balls, and an endless series of social visits. And somewhere in the slums of the city, the former confidant was dying of poverty, keeping secrets that brought her nothing but pain. This system of mutual responsibility and betrayal was the foundation on which the outward prosperity of the Gilded Age was built. Beautiful dresses required not only money, but also human sacrifices. Every perfect hairstyle could hide a story of someone being thrown out onto the street on a rainy night. We are very interested in hearing your point of view. What do you think about such a price for maintaining one's reputation? Write about it in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any new stories. Are you ready to learn the truth about the most thankless role in a wealthy household? A companion was the shadow of her mistress, a woman of noble birth but without means. She was hired not for housework, but to create the appearance of propriety and keep company in society. She had to be educated enough to hold a conversation, but inconspicuous enough not to overshadow her mistress. However, her main function was to act as a living shield for her mistress's reputation. When a lady went for a walk or to the theater, her companion was obliged to follow her like a silent guard. Society believed that the presence of a third party guaranteed the absence of any frivolity. But in practice, ladies often used companions as a screen for their secret desires. They might ask their companion to wait in the carriage or look at the flowers in another part of the garden. If a secret rendezvous became apparent or someone noticed a lady in an inappropriate place, the companion was always blamed. She was accused of not keeping an eye on her, leaving her alone, or even worse, condoning sin. The poor woman was caught between a rock and a hard place. She could not refuse her mistress's request to leave her alone, but she bore full responsibility for the consequences. Accusations of aiding and abetting immoral behavior put an end to a companion's career forever. Unlike servants, for whom physical labor was the norm, companions often had no practical skills. Losing their reputation meant not just a change of job, but a fall to the very bottom of society. They were too proud to accept charity and too weak for factory work. To save themselves, ladies could tell their husbands or fathers that it was the companion who had arranged the meeting or passed the note. They would act out scenes of righteous anger, accusing their friend of betraying their trust. This was monstrous hypocrisy, because the companion was often the only person who sincerely cared about the well-being of the mistress. In the drawing rooms, people whispered about how yet another companion had turned out to be a schemer who had destroyed the peace of the family. No one wanted to listen to the poor woman's excuses because the word of a rich lady carried immeasurably more weight. It was more convenient for society to believe in the cunning of a hired worker than in the frivolity of a representative of the elite. Many of these women ended their days in cheap boarding houses, selling the last pitiful trinkets left over from their former lives. They wrote letters asking for help, which went unanswered. Their former patrons quickly found replacements for them, new, unsuspecting shadows. It was a cruel game where the rules changed during play in favor of the strong. The companion sold not only her time, but also her good name, often without even realizing the terms of the deal. She was a shock absorber, taking the blows of fate intended for someone else. Do you think it is fair to blame a subordinate for a manager's mistakes if they had no way of influencing the situation? Want to learn a secret that will change your life? About how even cleaning a room could become a death sentence? I discovered this by accident while studying old police reports from that time. One of the most common reasons for dismissing maids was accusations of stealing small jewelry or money. But if you dig deeper, behind these dry lines of the reports, a completely different, frightening picture of reality emerges. Often, theft was not theft at all, but a way for the mistress to cover up her own financial mistakes. Ladies of high society often suffered from boredom and sought solace in gambling, which took place in private salons. Card debts were considered debts of honor and had to be paid immediately. Otherwise, a scandal was inevitable. When money was short and it was impossible to ask her husband, personal jewelry was used. Rings, brooches, and earrings were secretly taken to loan sharks or sold to buyers for half their price. But how could they explain the absence of the family ruby to their husbands before an important reception? The simplest and most cruel solution was to stage a theft. There was commotion in the house, the police were called, and suspicion inevitably fell on those who had access to the bedroom. The maid who cleaned the room became the ideal suspect. The lady would put on a show, tearfully recounting how she had trusted the girl. The police rarely bothered with a thorough investigation if the mistress pointed to a specific person. The maid could be arrested, interrogated with prejudice, and even if there was no evidence, her reputation was destroyed. Sometimes, tormented by remorse, the lady did not take the case to prison, but simply dismissed the girl on suspicion. She might even give her a little money for the time being, which looked like an act of mercy. In fact, it was a payment for silence and a way to ease her own guilt. A girl accused of theft was effectively blacklisted. No respectable household would hire her, fearing for their property. She was left with only the dirtiest and lowest paid jobs, where no references were required. Her entire life, built on honest labor, was destroyed in an instant to cover her mistress's card debt. There were cases when jewelry was miraculously found several months later, when passions had subsided. A lady might accidentally find the missing item in the lining of her coat or at the bottom of a drawer. But by that time, the maid's fate had already been sealed, and no one was going to look for her to apologize. The golden glitter of jewelry in ballrooms often concealed dark stories of betrayal. Every lady knew that in case of extreme necessity, she had a backup plan at the cost of someone else's fate. And this cynicism was hidden behind fans and polite smiles. Click like if you are also outraged by such injustice and impunity. Want to know a secret that will change your life and your view of the history of the epistolary genre? In an era when letters were the only means of long-distance communication, paper held the most dangerous secrets. Personal secretaries or women hired to handle correspondence were on the front lines of the information war. Invitations, bills, and of course, love letters passed through their hands. Ladies often dictated letters to their secretaries, but wrote the most intimate lines themselves. However, the storage and destruction of this correspondence was often entrusted to the assistant. If a letter that was supposed to be burned suddenly ended up in the hands of a husband or blackmailer, it was not the person who wrote it who was to blame, but the one who hid it poorly. There were situations when a lady caught red-handed claimed that the letter was not intended for her, but for her secretary. She claimed that she was simply reading someone else's message or keeping it at the request of her assistant. It was a despicable but effective move to shift the romantic connection to an unmarried woman of lower status. The secretary found herself in a terrible position. If she began to justify herself and accuse her mistress of lying, no one would believe her, and she would be branded a brazen liar. If she remained silent, she would take the blame for someone else's affair, which would forever close the doors to decent society for her. Most often, they chose silence, hoping for financial compensation upon dismissal. It also happened that secretaries were accused of forging handwriting. If a bill or receipt surfaced that the lady did not want or could not pay, she could claim that her signature had been forged by a mercenary assistant. It was incredibly difficult to prove otherwise, given the dependent position of the employee. The dismissal of a secretary often took place quietly, without the police but with complete social ostracism. The lady simply informed her circle of acquaintances that her assistant had turned out to be unreliable or prone to fantasies. This was enough to ensure that the woman would never find decent work again. The ruined lives of these educated women were the price they paid for the passion and recklessness of their employers. They took secrets to their graves that could have destroyed entire dynasties. Their silence was bought with fear and despair. The writing desk in the boudoir was not just a piece of furniture, but a minefield. Each envelope concealed a potential explosion, and the sapper who detonated first was always a hired worker. Do you think these women could have acted differently in those circumstances? Are you ready for the shocking truth about what the stains on their clothes were hiding? In the huge basements of mansions, amid clouds of hot steam and the smell of soap, laundresses worked as invisible laborers of cleanliness. They rarely went upstairs, but they knew more about the lives of their masters than anyone else. The clothes they washed spoke to them in the language of stains and smells, telling stories that were kept silent in the living rooms. Wine stains on a morning gown, traces of grass on the hem of a ball gown, the scent of someone else's perfume on a man's shirt. All of this passed through their hands. The laundress's main task was not simply to wash the fabric, but to destroy the evidence. She had to restore the clothes' innocence, erasing traces of sin and carelessness. If the laundress failed and the stain remained visible, it could lead to disaster. The lady could cause a scandal, accusing the laundress of damaging the expensive fabric in order to hide the true origin of the stain. It was easier to dismiss a woman for not knowing how to handle silk than to explain to her husband where the traces of street dirt on the dress came from. Sometimes laundresses were accused of deliberately damaging clothes out of envy or malice. A lady who wanted to get rid of a dress that reminded her of an unpleasant event or mistake might deliberately tear it or spill ink on it and then blame the laundress. "That clumsy woman ruined my favorite outfit," she would exclaim, and the worker's fate was sealed. The work of a laundress was hellishly hard physically, And these women's hands were red and swollen from boiling water and alkali. And when emotional injustice was added to this, it broke a person completely. A dismissed laundress lost not only her livelihood, but also the roof over her head, as she often lived in the house. The laundress's silence could not be bought. It was understood to be part of their job. It was believed that people in their circle should not even understand the meaning of the stains they washed away. But they understood everything, and this understanding made them dangerous witnesses who were disposed of at the first opportunity. There was no room for romance in laundries. Harsh reality reigned there. If a stain could not be washed out, it was cut out along with the person. It was a conveyor belt of cleanliness, fueled by human destinies. Every snow-white tablecloth and every starched shirt in these houses had its own invisible story of the struggle for survival. The cleanliness of reputation required the constant, exhausting work of those who were considered dirt. Have you ever wondered, looking at old dresses in museums, whose hands restored them to their original appearance? Guess what happened next when a huge shortfall was discovered in the accounts? The housekeeper was the main figure in the management of the house, a general in a skirt with a bunch of keys to all the storerooms jingling at her belt. She was responsible for purchasing food, candles, coal, and everything else necessary for the life of a huge estate. Significant sums of money allocated by the head of the family for the household passed through her hands. However, it often happened that the lady needed cash for personal needs that her husband was not supposed to know about. These could be debts to a dressmaker, help for poor relatives, or card losses. The lady would come to the housekeeper and ask, and sometimes order, her to give her some of the household money, promising to return it next week. The housekeeper, being a hired worker, could not refuse the mistress of the house. She gave out the money, cutting back on food expenses for the servants or postponing payment of suppliers' bills. But next week often did not come. The debt grew, and the financial hole became more and more noticeable. Being fired as a thief was a terrible blow to the housekeeper. These were women who had spent years building a reputation for impeccable honesty. They lost not just their jobs, but the meaning of their entire lives, their professional dignity. Often, these women left the house with their heads held high, without saying a word in their defense, but with broken hearts. They knew that they had saved the world and the family at the cost of their future, and the lady continued to live in comfort, only slightly frowning at the unpleasant scene. Sometimes housekeepers managed to find new jobs, but in homes of a lower class, where their past mistakes were overlooked for the sake of their experience. But the fall from the top of the servant hierarchy was painful and humiliating. The system of household management was built on trust, which was too often used as a bargaining chip. The keys on the housekeeper's belt were a symbol of power, but that power was illusory in the face of the whims of the owners. Do you agree that silence in such a situation is a sign of strength of spirit, not weakness? What if I show you a time machine and we travel to the kitchen, where not only soups but also passions were boiling? The kitchen was the heart of the home, the place where culinary masterpieces for dinner parties were created. The cook was the queen of this hot realm, and the success of the reception depended on her skill. But even the most perfect dish could cause a scandal if the hostess's mood changed or plans went awry. Imagine the situation. A lady receives unpleasant news just before dinner or quarrels with an important guest. The atmosphere at the table becomes tense, and she needs to find an outlet for her irritation or a reason to interrupt the dinner. An unsuccessful dish became the perfect target. The lady could loudly declare that the soup was too salty and the meat was overcooked, even though everything was actually cooked to perfection. The guests, following etiquette, agreed with the hostess or tactfully remained silent. For the cook, who had put her heart and soul into this dinner, it was a public insult and a blow to her professional pride. Sometimes such scenes ended in dismissal right in the middle of the evening. "Get out! You've disgraced me in front of my guests," the lady would shout, playing her role as the offended virtuous woman. The cook was kicked out without even being allowed to collect her belongings and accused of incompetence. In reality, the food was just an excuse. The lady needed to divert attention, create drama, or simply take out her anger on someone who couldn't fight back. The cook became a lightning rod for emotions that could not be expressed openly. There were cases when the lady gave contradictory instructions on the menu and then accused the cook of mixing everything up. This often happened when the lady tried to save money by ordering cheap products and then felt ashamed of the poor table in front of her rich guests. The cook was blamed for the stinginess of the dishes, allegedly stealing some of the ingredients. Firing a good cook was a problem for the household, but the mistress's pride was more important. The lady was willing to endure temporary inconveniences in order to save face and prove she was right. For a cook, losing her job with a bad recommendation meant she couldn't find work in a good household. She had to go work in taverns or cheap establishments where her culinary talent faded away among simple and coarse dishes. The heat from the stoves in the kitchen was nothing compared to the cold indifference that reigned upstairs. Skill and diligence were worthless when it came to saving the mistress's mood. It was an unfair war where the weapons were sauce boats and trays, and the victims were simple workers with knives and wooden spoons. With the advent of the first automobiles and the preservation of horse-drawn carriages, the role of the coachman or chauffeur began to take on special significance. These people did not just drive vehicles, they managed the logistics of their mistress's secret lives. Taking a lady to the store, which was actually her lover's apartment, or delivering a mysterious package, all this was part of their unspoken duties. The chauffeur had to be deaf and blind to everything that did not concern the road. But sometimes circumstances were such that his silence was not enough. If the carriage was spotted in a questionable area, or if it broke down at the most inopportune moment, the lady had to urgently find an excuse. She could tell her husband that the chauffeur had lost his way, taken the wrong road against her orders, or was drunk. "That scoundrel took me to who knows where," she would exclaim, saving her reputation. Her husband, enraged by the servant's incompetence or insolence, would immediately dismiss him. Accusations of drunkenness were the most common and devastating for coachmen and chauffeurs. It closed the doors to any decent garage or stable. A man entrusted with the lives of passengers could not have such a reputation. Sometimes drivers were fired simply because they became unwitting witnesses to overly explicit scenes. The lady began to fear that the servant might blab and decided to strike a preemptive blow. She would find any little thing, a dirty fender on the car or being a minute late, and blow it up into a reason for dismissal. The lady in her silks and furs looked at them through the car window as if they were part of the interior. She did not think about the fact that this person had a family to feed. The main thing was to get to the destination without tarnishing her reputation. Road dust settled on their uniforms, and the dust of lies settled on their destinies. And it was much more difficult to shake off the latter. The history of transportation in that era is not only a history of progress, but also a chronicle of human sacrifices on the altar of someone else's vanity. The fate of elderly servants who had devoted their entire lives to one family was particularly tragic. Nannies who had raised children who were now adults, old maids who had become almost members of the family. It would seem that they were guaranteed a peaceful old age and respect, but in times of crisis, sentimentality took a back seat. When the family went bankrupt or when the lady needed to urgently cut costs to cover her debts, it was the elderly who were the first to be hit. They were considered dead weight, freeloaders who were no longer useful but required maintenance. Dismissal was presented as a well-deserved rest, but often without any pension or with a meager allowance that was not enough to live on. The lady might see off the old servant with tears in her eyes, promising to write and help, but as soon as the door closed, she was forgotten. These people, accustomed to living in the rhythm of a large house, found themselves in a frightening void and poverty. They lost not only their home, but also their family, because many of them did not have one of their own. They sacrificed their personal lives for the sake of serving their masters. Their decades of devotion were devalued in an instant. "She has become too old and forgetful," the lady would say to her guests, explaining the absence of a familiar face in the house. In reality, the old maid could have become too perceptive and an inconvenient conscience for her mistress. Their quiet departure went unnoticed amid the noisy balls, but it left the darkest stain on the conscience of the era. These broken lives are a silent reproach to the heartlessness hidden behind politeness and charity. Ultimately, the system of oppression and blame shifting was a trap not only for the servants, but also for the mistresses themselves. The ladies lived in constant fear of condemnation, fear of losing status, fear of exposure. This fear made them cruel, turning their hearts to ice. They were prisoners in golden cages, where the bars were made of social norms and expectations. To survive in this world, they had to sacrifice those who were weaker. This does not justify their actions, but it explains the mechanism of evil that reigned in beautiful interiors. Servants were expendable in the battle for social survival. Their lives were broken to patch up the cracks in the facade of prosperity. It was the price that little people paid for the grand ambitions of their masters. We see that the luxury of that era had its dark side. Behind every glittering social event, behind every perfect dinner, there was an invisible army of people who supported this glamour with their labor and sometimes their honor. History has not preserved the names of most of these servants. They have dissolved into time, leaving only a ghostly trace in old house books. But their pain and sacrifice were real. Today, we can only pay tribute to those who were unjustly forgotten and accused. Their stories are a lesson in the value of human dignity, which should not depend on a bank account. We have lifted the veil on the secrets of the wealthy houses of the past and seen the price paid for an impeccable reputation. These stories make us think about how easy it is to destroy a person's life by using power and position. I hope this story has touched your heart and made you look at the era of crinolines and tailcoats in a new light. What other secrets of the past would you like to uncover with us? Suggest topics for future videos in the comments, because history still holds many untold dramas. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on new journeys through time.